Have you ever felt like your life should be full by now, but every time you look inside, all you can hear is silence? Like everyone else was handed something, you are still standing at the door waiting to receive. Not the cup you asked for, not the portion you pictured, not the delivery you keep listening for. Something quieter than all of that, and already here. As I speak, I am turning your face toward the jar in your hands, the one you keep lifting to the light to see whether anything has finally been placed inside. Come and sit with me a while over this vessel you have been carrying half ashamed, certain it is emptier than everyone else's. You do not have to fill it before you come. You do not have to explain to me why it feels so light in your grip. I am not asking you to arrive full. I am asking you to hold it open. Let me show you what has been resting inside the clay the whole long time you spent waiting for a shipment from somewhere else. There is a scene playing in you. I have watched it more times than you would guess. You lift the jar of your life up to the window. You tilt it. You listen for the sound of something moving around inside. Nothing rattles. So you set it back down on the shelf and decide you are still empty, still waiting, still behind everyone who seems to have received already. A mother counts what is left on the table after the bills are covered, and here's only the shortfall in it. A man works a second shift. He drives home in the dark, still sure he is not enough for the people sleeping in that house. Someone lifts their eyes to another person's life the way you stare through a lit window from a cold street, convinced that every other vessel came filled, and yours alone came cracked. None of that watching is hidden from me. I've been beside the shelf where you keep the jar, not off on some far hill deciding whether you have earned a filling. I have been close to the tired hands that keep checking, close to the small daily arithmetic you do when no one else is awake to see it. And the ache underneath all your counting is not the ache of a person who has nothing. It is the ache of a person who has been told to keep waiting for the very thing already sealed inside them. Notice, too, how the asking has shrunk in you over the long wait. It used to be a full request, spoken with the confidence that the jar would be answered. Now, on the thinnest nights, it is barely a sentence. Half a breath pushed toward the ceiling that you are not even sure counts as prayer. It counts. Not one of them has slipped past me. The whispered half-question you assume is too faint to land anywhere is the very one I bend down to catch. And I have seen the quieter accounting too. The kind no one else is in the room for. The same page of numbers opened on your phone and closed again. The message to someone who owes you an answer, started and moved back to your drafts. The plan you keep pricing out in the dark, setting it down, because the jar looks too empty to even begin. None of that is a verdict. It only shows me where you have been hunting for fullness in the one place it was never kept. Some of you learned this counting early. In the house you grew up in, there was never quite enough. And you learned to watch the level in every jar, to measure love by what was left over, to brace for the bottom of things before you had even reached the middle. You were handed a scarcity you did not choose, and you have carried it into rooms that are not that house and years that are not those years, still checking, still rationing, still sure the supply could run dry at any moment. I saw the child who learned to expect too little. I have never once measured you, not the way that house measured you. And I have watched you do the hardest thing of all, which is to keep giving out of a jar you were sure was empty. You poured patience into your children on the days you had none left for yourself. You carried someone else's worry when your own was already more than you could hold. You showed up again. For people who never once asked how full your vessel was, you thought you were running on nothing. You were not. You were pouring from the treasure, calling it your last reserves, and the fact that it never ran out was not you stretching thin. It was me, keeping the vessel full faster than you could empty it. So do this with me now, if you are somewhere you can. Let both hands come to rest open in your lap, palms turned up toward the ceiling, the way you would hold something you are waiting to receive, rather than something you are straining to keep from losing. Notice how unfamiliar open hands feel after all this gripping. That upturned shape is the shape of a vessel, not a fist that clenches around crumbs. A bowl that can hold what is poured. The emptiness does not visit at random. It has its favorite hours. And I am with you in each one. Late, when the house has gone quiet. Nothing is left to occupy your hands. The sense of how little seems to hold you up. It comes rising like water against a wall, or early. In the seconds before you step in front of the people who count on you to be the one with plenty to give. You straighten yourself. You fix your expression into something that reads as abundance. You let them see a vessel that brims, because the ones who draw from you only ever look at the top of the jar. The top must never show how far down it has gone. I feel the whole cost of that act. Every bit of effort it takes to seem overflowing while you feel wrung dry. I have counted. And in this quiet, you can set the act down. Here the jar may look as empty as it truly feels. Consider how differently two people carry the same jar. One is certain the fullness has to arrive from outside. So every lean day frightens them. Every silence feels like a door being shut. And they spend their strength listening for a delivery, rationing their hope, bracing for the disappointment. The other knows the treasure is already sealed in. So the same lean day becomes survivable. The same silence becomes bearable. Because the fullness was never riding on what the day happened to bring. Nothing about their circumstances is different. The bills are the same. The waiting is the same. What changes is whether they believe there is anything in the vessel. When the surface goes quiet, and that one belief changes how every empty-seeming hour lands on them. And here is the strange thing about your emptiness. It has never once been a verdict on you. You have read it as proof. Proof that you were passed over. That the blessing went to other addresses and skipped yours. That you are simply one of those whose jar never seems to fill. But the emptiness you keep measuring is only the space where you have been looking for the wrong kind of fullness. You kept waiting for something to arrive from the outside and clatter into the jar. Meanwhile, the real treasure had already been set inside. So quietly, so far down. It made no sound when you shook it. Hear this, because it changes how you see all that waiting. The hunger in you to be filled. It was never a flaw. You were made to hold something. You were made to be a vessel. And a vessel that longs to be full is only doing what it was shaped to do. That reaching was never wrong. You reached for fullness because you were built to carry it. The only thing that went wrong is that you were told the fullness would come rattling in from outside, on a truck, on a deadline. All along, it had been poured in at the bottom. It was only waiting for you to stop shaking the jar, long enough to feel its weight. The picture of me you have been holding all these years was painted by people who taught you that provision is a wage. That if you wait long enough, believe hard enough, and prove yourself faithful enough, then one day the shipment finally arrives. The jar is filled from the outside as your reward. You learn to read me as a God who keeps the good thing back in a storeroom somewhere. He hands it over, only when you have earned the release. So you have poured your years, into qualifying for a yes. You check the door. You listen for the sound of an answer. You grieve the days nothing comes. And you begin to wonder whether your name was ever on the manifest at all. And the cruelest part of that lesson was what it did to your sense of yourself. If provision is a wage, then an empty jar can only mean one thing: you have not earned it. So every lean season turned into an accusation. Every delay turned into a grade. You started to believe that the emptiness was me withholding, that the withholding was a message about your worth, that if you were only more disciplined, more grateful, more faithful, the jar would finally fill. That is not how I provide, and it was never how I saw you. I do not fill the deserving and starve the rest. I placed the treasure in the clay, before the clay had done a single thing to deserve it, which is the whole reason it can never be taken back for anything you fail to do. So you learned to take the temperature of your life, to find out where you stood with me, a generous week. And you decided I was pleased and the jar was filling. A lean week, a closed door, a silence where you wanted a yes. And you decided I had turned away. The jar was draining. You made your circumstances the gauge, painted on the side of the vessel. And you have been reading that gauge for years, rising and falling with it, sure that what the week held was the same as what I held for you. But that gauge was never measuring the treasure. It was only ever tracking the rise and fall of your days, never the things sealed underneath them. Now hear the turn, because everything pivots on this single line. I did not leave your treasure in a storeroom, not shipped to you once your faith reaches the right weight. I placed it inside you already. The vessel you have judged as empty has been carrying it the entire time. What you have been waiting to receive, you have already been holding. Let me be plain with you about what this treasure is and what it is not, because someone has almost certainly promised you the wrong thing and stamped the word blessing on it. The treasure I set inside you is not a sum of money arriving by a date you could circle on a calendar. It is not a clean report this month, not a door swinging open right on the schedule you drew, not a particular person walking back through it because you finally waited well enough. The voices that attach a deadline to a promise and then call it faith are not describing this treasure at all. They are handing you an image of faith that cannot hold the weight of real waiting. And on the morning their date passes, your trust in me is not meant to fall apart along with it. What I sealed into the clay is greater and far steadier than any of that. It is my own presence. It is my spirit, breathing in the deep place of you. It is a grace that does not thin out when the season turns hard and the table stays lean. If your hands have felt empty this whole stretch of waiting while what you longed for was already sealed inside them, set one word down here in the comments. Held. Not for anyone watching, for your own remembering, so that the next time you lift the jar to the light and hear nothing rattle, one true word is already sitting in the same place your fear has been living. Let me read you a sentence I had written down a very long time ago, and I need you to hear who it was meant for before I speak it, because it was not composed in some settled room among people whose lives had already come together. I set it down for the fragile. I set it down for a battered little gathering of believers in a city called Corinth. Ordinary people who felt as common as the clay pots on their own kitchen shelves. They had been knocked around by hard years. They knew they were nothing special to look at, easy to overlook, easy to break. They had started to believe the power of God must live in grander vessels than the plain, chipped ones they saw in the mirror. They were not the gathering you would have chosen to carry a treasure. They argued among themselves. They had been embarrassed by their own weakness, mocked by louder voices who looked more impressive, more polished, more obviously full. They had begun to wonder whether the plainness of their lives disqualified them from holding anything of mine at all. And it was to them, right in the middle of that doubt, that I sent this line. Not to the celebrated, not to the ones already overflowing, to the cracked and the common, so that they would know the treasure had never once depended on the beauty of the jar. Before I read it aloud, do one small thing with me. Let your eyes come to rest on a single ordinary object somewhere near you. Do not name it. Do not decide whether it is worth anything or sort it into useful and useless. Just let it be seen for one breath. Notice that even the plainest thing in the room is still holding the light that happens to fall across it. So are you. The clay was never the point of the story. The clay is only what carries the thing that matters, and the thing that matters is already inside. Say it slowly with me now. This is what I had written for the ones who felt too ordinary to be chosen. It's got Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. Take it apart with me, clause by clause, because each piece was set down for the jar in your hands. Look first at what I called you, a jar of clay, not a flaw in the plan, not a mistake I am waiting to upgrade. Clay is common. Clay is fragile. Clay chips at the rim and shows every crack. I chose it on purpose. I did not hide the treasure inside gold so that people would admire the container. I put it inside plain clay, so that when the light spills out of you, no one, least of all you, could mistake it for something you manufactured. The ordinariness of the jar is not the problem. It is the whole design. Now look at the word treasure, and notice where I put it. Not owed to you, not scheduled for you, in you. Present tense. We have this treasure. Not we are waiting for this treasure. Not we will qualify for it someday. It is already resting within the vessel, and the vessel is you. The treasure is my own life, set down in the middle of your ordinary one. Because my Son came down into the plainest clay there is, he took on a body that could tire and bleed and break. And by his Spirit, he now lives within the very jar you have been calling empty. That is the treasure, not a shipment on its way. A presence already arrived, and look at the last part, because it turns your whole emptiness into good news, to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. The reason the container is plain is so the power is unmistakably mine. Your cracks are not disqualifying you. Your cracks are the very places the light I placed inside you leaks out, where others can see it. The thin walls of your clay, the very fragility you have been ashamed of, are exactly how the treasure shows. A jar too impressive would only get the credit. A jar of clay lets everyone see that the glory came from what was poured in, not from the pot. And here is what makes this treasure something you can rest your whole weight on, because setting it inside you was not cheap. The one I sealed in the clay is my own Son. He did not count it beneath him to become a fragile vessel himself. He took on skin that could tire, hands that could bleed, a frame that could be broken, and he carried the whole glory of heaven inside that plain and breakable body. The builders looked at him and saw nothing to prize. Common clay, a carpenter from a forgotten town. They cast him aside. But the treasure inside him could not be broken, even when the vessel was. He went down into death. the deepest emptiness there is. And he came up carrying life. That is the treasure now sealed in you. Not a fragile hope I am asking you to protect. A life that has already gone down to the floor of the deepest emptiness and risen from it still full. Look back now at the question you started with. When you lifted the jar to the light and heard nothing move and decided you were still empty. Here, then, is the answer I owed you. You heard nothing rattle. The treasure I set inside you does not clatter around like loose coins in a tin. It fills the vessel from the bottom up. You have been shaking a jar that is already full and mistaking the silence for lack. The silence was never emptiness. It was fullness that does not need to make a sound. And do not miss what this means for the very sound you kept listening for. You have been waiting to hear the treasure arrive. Some unmistakable rattle. Some proof loud enough to finally end the doubt. But the deepest fullness I give does not announce itself with noise. The jar filled to the brim makes less sound when you move it, not more. Because there is no empty space left inside for anything to knock around in. The silence you took as the worst news was the best news you had. It was the quiet of a vessel with no room left to fill. And my word has always spoken of me this way, not as one who measures provision with a tight fist, but as one whose giving spills over. I once said that what a person gives will be given back to them, poured out, pressed down, shaken together and running over, spilling right past the rim and into the lap. I set a table in the middle of a hard season and let the cup on it overflow, while the ones who opposed the guest looked on. That is the sort of provision I am. Not a careful ration measured out to the deserving. A vessel filled past its own edges, because the one doing the pouring has never once been counting. So stop grading the vessel. You have spent years inspecting the clay, cataloging every chip and every hairline crack, deciding that a jar like yours could not possibly be holding anything worth having. But I never asked you to be impressive. I asked you to be carried, and you are. The treasure does not leak away through the cracks. The light does. And a jar that lets the light out is doing the one thing it was made to do. Let me hand you one small practice to keep through the coming days, and it does not need to be done perfectly to be real. When the old emptiness returns and you find yourself lifting the jar to the light again, turn your hands palm up for one breath and ask a different question. Not, when will it finally arrive? But what has already been said in here that I keep shaking the jar to find? Then answer softly, low enough that only I hear it. The treasure is already in. You may feel nothing the first time. Keep returning to it anyway. This is not a spell you are casting. It is agreement with what my word has already settled. If you would like to make it concrete, picture the single thing you have felt surest you lack. The fullness you keep waiting to be handed. Name it plainly, one time, for exactly what it is. A good thing you have wanted, not a proof of my neglect. Then hold it up next to the treasure that is already in you, and let yourself feel the difference between a shipment that may or may not come, and a presence that is already down inside the clay. The first you cannot schedule. The second you have never once been without. You are not an empty vessel waiting by the door. You are a jar of clay with the light already burning inside it. And the next time you catch that light leaking out of one of your cracks, the patience you did not know you had, the kind word that came when you had every reason to be sharp, the steadiness that held in a moment you expected yourself to break. Do not explain it away. Do not credit it to a good mood or a lucky day. Let yourself say quietly, That was the treasure showing. That was the thing inside the clay, coming out through exactly the place I was ashamed of. The cracks you have wanted so badly to hide are the windows the glory uses. You do not have to be a flawless vessel for the light to get out. You only have to stop covering the cracks long enough to let it. If you want a rhythm for it, let it be simple enough to carry without any effort. Before the counting starts, turn your palms up for the length of one breath and say, "The treasure is already in." Later, when the day has emptied you out and the old sense of lack comes creeping back, turn them up again and say the same thing. You are not conjuring anything. You are not filling the jar by saying it. You are only agreeing with what is already true, letting your own voice catch up to what my word has long since settled. Some days it will feel like nothing. Keep turning your hands up anyway. The treasure is in whether the day feels full or not. And be patient with how long this takes to feel true, because you are unlearning a lifetime of listening at the door. For years, the arrival of fullness was always somewhere ahead of you, always about to come, always one answered prayer away. To turn from the door and feel for what is already inside will seem at first like giving up on the very thing you have been waiting for. It is not. It is only stopping the search for what was never lost and settling your weight onto what has been holding you the entire time. The turning is slow. You will drift back to that old waiting 100 times. Each time you can simply come back to the jar and remember it was never empty. And when a day comes that hands you no words at all, let the breath do the praying. Push one exhale out longer and lower than feels natural, until the lungs are nearly empty. And let that be prayer enough. This treasure never depended on eloquence, just as the jar never earned the light by being lovely. It is in you, because I placed it, not because you argued your way into deserving it. On your thinnest, weakest day, you hold it as fully as on your strongest, since the holding was never a thing you accomplished. It was mine to do. You will lose the thread of this. The old reflex of shaking the jar and hearing only lack will return, and you will find yourself back in that old posture of waiting, listening again for what already sits within the house. That is fine. The treasure did not pour itself out on the afternoons you forgot it was there. This is not a rule you must keep without a single slip to hold it in place. It is something true that you are gradually letting yourself lean on. Your forgetting takes nothing at all out of the jar, and stopping the search may bring an odd resistance with it, which is nothing to be alarmed by. The waiting had grown familiar. Standing watch at the door had come to feel like devotion. Rattling the jar felt like pulling your weight. So the day you let yourself trust that the treasure is already within, some corner of you may grieve the old watch. The way someone can ache for a load they set down only because their shoulders had shaped themselves around it. Let the ache move through. You can walk away from the door and lose nothing, because whatever you were waiting on was never arriving through it. It was within you the whole time, present even on the days you were most certain it had passed your house by. You are not behind. You were never behind. While you were counting what had not arrived, the very thing you were counting toward was already resting in you, quietly keeping you alive through every season. You were certain you had nothing. The provision you kept asking me to send, I had already made it. I made it the day I set my own life down inside your ordinary one. The jar is full. Your longest wait did not empty it. Your leanest season did not drain it. The cracks you were ashamed of are the seams the light comes through. What you kept waiting to receive was set inside you before you ever began to count. The treasure is common clay holding uncommon glory. And the glory has always belonged to me, which is exactly why it will never run out on you. Amen. Before you go, let me ask you one thing, and answer it wherever you are. What is the one fullness you have been waiting to be handed, when I am telling you it already fills the jar you keep calling empty? Name it in the comments below. I read the words you leave there. And if a face came to mind while you listened, someone who has been staring at their own vessel, certain it came cracked and empty, pass this along to them, so it reaches the shelf where they keep it too.